A nice class, laws of forbidden relations, and incredibly relevant. So tonight is actually an incredibly special night. In the Jewish calendar, it's the 22nd day. The day begins at night in the Jewish calendar. So tonight begins the 22nd day of the Jewish month of Shvat, which is the 11th month of the Jewish calendar. And on this date was the passing of the wife of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka. This is, you can see the picture, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka. It's a better shot of it. So I thought we could begin tonight with a story, an incident that happened, just to reflect a little, gain a little, and then move on to what we're supposed to be talking about. Actually, before that, I want to answer a question that was asked. And then after that, we'll discuss what we're supposed to be talking about tonight. So Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka was a very private individual, and not that many people knew her. She wasn't out there in a public way, but she was obviously a very, very godly person. She just want to share one little story that was a lesson we can learn from it, from her life. So this happened maybe about 1987, about a year before she passed away. She passed away in 1988. This was in 1987. She was already quite weak, and she would often go with her driver to a nice green area in Long Island to be able to sit out by the water, breathe fresher air than you're going to find in Brooklyn, and try to give her body some peace and rejuvenation. She did this quite frequently. And one day, after they had sat out by this water, they were driving back, and there was a road detour. So instead of going the normal road, they went a different road. Okay. And as they're driving, on the side of the road, they see, or the driver sort of, saw without really seeing, a family. Looks like they were moving out of a house, taking out all their possessions. He sees a police car parked by, didn't really connect the police car to the incident, and whatever. I mean, move on. And suddenly, Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka said, "Can you go back? I want to know what's going on there." And he's like, "Well, that's really weird. Why should she care? Obviously doesn't know these people, and like they're moving. I mean, people move. It's a very normal thing to do." Okay, he didn't ask any questions. Back, parked. She said, Can you go out and find out what's going on?" It's like, okay, again, what could be going on? It was out, and he found that actually something was going on. And there was a reason there was a police car parked there, and that this was a family, a poor family that had not been able to pay their rent for several months, and they were being evicted. And that's why the cop was there. And that's why these workers were forcibly taking all their possessions out of their home. That was the story, and not a nice story. But again, a story of people we don't know, and probably not such an uncommon story. He comes back, and he tells Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka the story. She says, "Can you go and ask them how much money they owe?" Hey, he's not going to ask any questions. He goes back, and he says, "How much money is owed for this family?" The guy's like, "What's it your business?" But he told him the amount. He went back to the car. He told Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, and Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka wrote out a check for the entire amount, several $1,000s, for a family she didn't know. He takes the check. He walks over, gives it to the boss of the workers, and the guy is stunned. Like he's never seen this in his whole history, that suddenly a stranger drives by and writes a check for the amount of money owed, but looked like a good check. He told the guys, bring everything back. And before the family could even understand what happened, to go over and thank Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, she said to her driver, "Let's leave quickly." She didn't want any thanks. And he was like, "What is going on? There's a family you totally don't know. They don't know you. You don't know them. You're writing a check for thousands of dollars. Why?" And she explained, "Because we took a detour. We never drive on this road." As soon as I saw that detour, I'm like, God wants us to go on a different road today. So I was observing, because I knew there's a reason God wants us to go on a different road. And then when I saw this, people, things being moved out, a police car, I understood this must be why. An amazing story. An amazing story that's very relevant to us in terms of sensitivity to others, relevant to us in terms of being aware of the hand of God. And when we're in a situation different than we normally are, to understand there's a reason, and there's something I need to do about it. lot of room for introspection, a lot of room for thought about these concepts. We're going to move on now to answer a question that I was asked. Danielle, if you can read the question, and I will give the answer. Thank you so much.
How do we apply the mitzvah of do not mingle, Israel and Gentiles, due to the past? We see Zipporah, Moshe, Jacob and Milcah and Zilpah, Shalomo and all wives from all over the region and the whole, I'm sorry, I don't know what that word is, come out of Egypt, they mingle together at one point or another.
Right. So the question, which sort of ties into what we're discussing, because we're going to be discussing forbidden relations, and we're definitely not going to get to that point now. But the question being asked here is, someone posted this as a question, we say that Jews and non-Jews do not intermarry. And if we look historically, if we look biblically, look in the times of the scriptures, of the writings of the prophets, it seems that they were, or weren't they, or were they? What was going on? So in that question, a number of couples are being listed, like Moses and his wife Zipporah. Zipporah was a convert from Midian. Jacob and his two wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, even though at that point no one was officially Jewish and they were from the same stock of the family of Abraham. So that really wasn't a problem. That just sort of, I don't know why that got put in the pot. King Solomon and his wives, who were, many of them were converts. So we're not supposed to mingle. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here is they were converts. Once a person converts, they are 100% Jewish. No discrimination of a convert to say, well, that's a convert. This is a blue-blooded Jew. How are they marrying each other? Once a person's a convert, they're as Jewish as any other Jew. And therefore, there's no concept of don't intermarry with a non-Jew. They're not a non-Jew, they're a convert. And actually, in the situation with King Solomon, he specifically really had wives from the various nations to elevate the sparks embedded in all the nations. Meaning in every nation, there's a spiritual energy. Every nation of the world, there's a spiritual energy. When someone converts from that nation, it's as if all that energy is now extracted and able to be utilized by a Jew to serve God. Because on one hand, they were from this nation, but now they're a Jew. Again, depending on the nation, depends on how it's utilized. So for example, it says the most famous convert of all times was Ruth. She was from an incredibly wicked people, the nation of Moab. Such a wicked nation that it says they really would have been destroyed by God, but Ruth was coming from them. So because she was coming from them, they were saved until she emerged. And when she emerged and when she converted, she actually extracted all of the enormous energy, because someone who's enormously evil has a lot of energy. It's just going the wrong direction. All of the enormous energy of this horrible nation of Moab, and was able then to utilize it for God. The one example in that question, what Danielle wasn't sure how to read, is called the Erev Rav. And the person asked, well, what about the Erev Rav? So who are the Erev Rav? Let me explain the backstory to understand the question. The Erev Rav in English is translated as the mixed multitude. And these were converts, but not viewed as really 100% correct converts, because they weren't viewed as sincere converts. This was right when the Jews were leaving Egypt. And now suddenly the Jews are like the winning team. Well, you want to jump on the winning bandwagon. So, hey, the Jews are the winning team. Let's become Jewish. A number of Egyptians or other nations that lived in Egypt all jumped to become Jewish to go with the winners. So on one hand, they converted. There was no prohibition of having relationships with them. But at the same time, as we see historically, they were, if we can call it, a thorn in the side of the Jewish people in their 40 years in the desert. They were definitely people that created a lot of anguish for the Jewish people, led to a lot of sin, and were troublesome and problematic. But they were converts, but they weren't the most sincere converts. And that's why, though they converted, they still were sort of separate because of the insincerity of their conversion. But any sincere convert is 100% like every Jew and is treated accordingly. So that was to answer that question that was asked. And that sort of leads into what we're going to be discussing tonight, which is the idea of forbidden relationship. Now, there are many, many chapters on forbidden relationships, and we're obviously only to begin to explore this tonight. I'll review some laws, many of which you'll know, and some of which you might not. And hopefully we'll find things applicable.
So, are Samaritans in Israel considered mixed multitudes or
Samaritans
broad?
are not Jewish.
Okay, yeah, but
They're
they
not
are
considered Jewish at
converts?
all. I don't think they consider themselves Jewish. No, they're not converts. They're not Jews at all. Samaritans are
Okay.
descendants. Let me give you the history behind Samaritans. There was a very powerful world leader in ancient times. You know, everyone has this aspiration to conquer the entire world. The world was a smaller place. So we have Alexander the Great conquering the whole world. We have Ahasuerus of the Persian story conquering the whole world. So there was another person that conquered the whole world, Sanherib, the king of Assyria. And what he did, he had a very smart ploy. Every time he conquered a country, he actually exiled the people to some other area where he had already exiled those people. And then he brought in other people and plopped them there. And the reason he did this was a true realization that if I leave people in their native land, they're much more savvy. They're much more equipped to rebel. They know the land. They know the lay of the land. They have roots in the land. They have more care for the land. They're much more people. So it's been much easier for them to start at least a guerrilla warfare against me. But if I pick them up and transpose them to another place, well, they just have to deal with a new country, a new climate, a new housing, a new jobs in this totally foreign environment. So it's been quite a while before they'll have their roots down and they'll actually be able to think of rebelling. So when this world conqueror came to Israel, at that time, Israel had split, unfortunately, to two nations, a nation in the north, the kingdom of Israel, and a nation in the south, the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Israel were not living with the temple. The temple was in the southern kingdom. And therefore, much more quickly, they fell prey to idolatry, and they were not deserving of this enormous miracle of salvation. And they were conquered by Sanherib, the king of Assyria, and they were exiled. And we have until today the belief that with the redemption, these, as we call them, 10 lost tribes, will be reunited with us. And the Jews of the world today are descended from the southern, much smaller, actually, kingdom of Judah. That was much more righteous, that had the kings of David leading it, that had the temple, that had the priests, and therefore lasted longer because they were more deserving of God's compassion. And actually, when Sanherib, the king of Assyria, tried to attack the southern kingdom, God made a complete miracle and he was vanquished. But in the northern kingdom, Sanherib did what he always does. He exiled these 10 tribes, and now it's an empty country. Well, that's not good for him either. So he plopped another group of people there. Now, the people he brought were idolaters, the people from some other land that were brought there. And when these idolaters settled in this holy land of Israel, the lions came and started attacking them. And they were like, what's going on? We can't live here where there's lions here eating us up. And I don't remember who instructed them, but they were told, well, you can't live in this holy land unless you adopt some of the basic rules. So these people started like some idolatry, serving God to a certain way. They sort of made a stew pot of their own customs and some Jewish ideas, and they lived in the land. Now, the Jews at this point are not there. They've already, the southern kingdom has also been exiled. When the southern kingdom came back quite a number of years later, when they were given permission by Cyrus to rebuild the temple, so these Samaritans, as they call in Hebrew, Shomronim, they were like, oh, great, we're all one people, you're our brothers. And the Jews are like, no, you're not our brothers. You're non-Jews that are living in the land. We're Jews. Jews and non-Jews don't mix. And then they got really mad at them and they made problems and actually maligned them enough that the permission to rebuild the temple was revoked and only was restored when Darius, King Darius II, gave permission for the rebuilding of the temple. They are people that in ancient times, when there were more of them, always did what they could to harm the Jewish people. And at this point, there is just a very small group of them left, descendants of that ancient people. But they never were Jews. They never converted. They never accepted God as a Jew. And as such, they're viewed like any other non-Jew. Here about is one of the 7 Noahide laws, which is the laws of forbidden relationships. And as I said, there are many, many, many categories and subcategories and very many nuanced issues within this. We're just beginning today, so it's going to be sort of a broad introduction. So most of it, again, will be very basic knowledge. Biblically, there are 6 sexual acts forbidden to Gentiles as capital sins, meaning if someone will commit any one of them, the punishment would be death. There are many other forbidden relationships, but they're not biblically prohibited, and therefore they don't have the same capital offense. The ones that are biblically prohibited are a man and his father's present or former wife, a man and his mother, a man with a woman who's married to someone else, adultery, as we would call it, a man with another man, any homosexual relationship, bestial intercourse, a man and an animal, a man and his sister or half-sister from his mother. Those prohibitions are actually all learned from one verse, which is why they're all biblical. All of these laws apply to a woman equally, meaning we're saying as the verse is written a man, but it equally applies to a woman. So a Gentile woman is forbidden to have relationships with, now again, we're going to do the same thing in reverse. Her stepson, even if she's widowed or divorced from his father, her son, any man other than her husband, an animal, her full brother, or her half brother from her mother. So all of these laws, forbidden relationships for men, forbidden relationships for women. And there are many others. These are what are all derived from one verse, and that's why we're calling them biblical prohibitions for the Noahide, and that's why they have punished with a capital punishment, which is death. A Gentile man is liable for any relationships with his mother, even if she is not currently married to his father, even if she was never married to his father. At the same token, he is forbidden to have any relationships with any wife of his father on any level, even if she's totally not his mother, even after his father passed away, even if she's divorced, even if his father died and she remarried someone else, and now she's single, still once father's wife, always father's wife. Even if there was never any official marriage, it was just a marriage of what we would call common law. They lived together as a married couple without any civil or religious concept of being married. A common law marriage, 100% is considered a marriage for a Gentile Noahide couple. On any level, that would then be forbidden as long as there was some status of wife at any point in her life to his father at any point in his father's life. And there are many other people. We're not going to go into all of them because there's many, many categories here. Now, all of the other categories, besides the ones that I listed that are biblical, are forbidden, but again, not forbidden biblically, and therefore don't have the death penalty. But if the country was ruled by Noahide, it would be very appropriate for the country to create laws to forbid these relationships and to create punishments for them. As we're saying, every one of these forbidden relationships is a capital sin, and the man and woman are equally liable. But this only applies if the person is of an age of maturity, and of course, a person who's acting voluntarily. If God forbid there was ever a situation where someone was coerced into any relationship, then obviously there's no punishment at all. But if they are voluntary and they are of age to understand what they're doing, then they're liable. So this actually leads to a very interesting discussion, which I thought is very relevant. What is the age for a Noahide to be liable for their actions? Now, in the Jewish world, that's a very simple question. It's a very simple answer. It's written. Boy, it's age 13. For a girl, it's age 12. Any Jewish boy 13 and over is a man from Jewish law. Any Jewish girl 12 and older is a woman from Jewish law. They're no longer a child. The actions are completely liable. They have complete responsibility for all of God's commandments. So the question asked and debated and discussed among the sages is, are these the ages for Noachides? Is every Noahide child, when he is a 13-year-old boy or a 12-year-old girl, considered completely liable for all actions? And the answer is, it's not so clear. And there's different opinions among the sages. And there are some that say yes, but there are others that say no. And that say no, for a Noahide, it's the age when they have the maturity of truly understanding the consequence of their actions, when they truly have the maturity that they can be liable, and it might be older than 12 or 13. It's the age when it works, when they are intellectually mature. Let's say we're looking at marriage. Let's say, now, of course, nowadays, this is not very relevant because in our society, people do not get married at a very young age. But in previous times, they did. And people at a very young age got married. It was, I mean, you're not going through schooling, you're not going through college, you're not, whatever your profession is, and whatever your father's profession was, you knew it by the time you were 9 or 10, and, you could set up your own home. So people got married at very young ages, sometimes appropriately, and sometimes not appropriately. We are told that to allow a boy who's 13 or a girl who's 12 to get married, even again, when we're thinking in Jewish law, when by 13 you're a man and 12 you're a woman, is still inappropriate. Why? Because they still don't have that intellectual maturity. And when we're saying that we don't have that intellectual maturity, our fear is it's going to become promiscuous. Not going to have faith to their marriage because they're not intellectually developed enough to have the maturation for that type of relationship. And therefore, they're giving here, they're saying roughly, again, this is a rough figure, but nowadays it'll be viewed as like around 17. Maybe in some societies a little younger, some societies a little older, but around 17 when they could be held liable enough, when they understand enough, and therefore until then they should not be put in a position such as marriage when we highly doubt it's going to be a loyal marriage because we don't think they have the intellectual maturity to have that type of relationship. But getting back to what we were saying, therefore, if a girl is officially married and she got married when she was 11, she starts having relationships with another man, we would not view it that she is transgressing because we wouldn't view her as being mature enough to understand what she's doing. It's consensual. She's not being forced. She's a married woman, but she's really too young to be a married woman, and she's too young to have the maturity for her actions. And again, nowadays, this is not very relevant, but in prior times, it actually really was. I don't know if any of you know of very young ages, if your grandparents or great-grandparents got married. Any of you know anything like that in your family history?
Well,
My
mom
great-grandmother got
when
married
she was 16.
Who?
know
My
if you can say
great-grandmother
that.
did.
Your great-grandmother got married how old?
16 in 1890. She had 12 children.
16, and she had 12 children. Danielle, did you also say your great-grandmother got married at 16?
No, my mom did.
Your mom, okay. I heard some of that. Your mom got
And
married how
she's
old?
60, so
And how old was she when she got married?
16.
16.
Yep.
Anyone else know of any parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents that got married very young? It used
Yeah,
to
my
be,
grandparents, they were 18. Yeah, my husband and I, like, we dated at 17 and 18, and we were convinced we wanted to get married, but no, we need to go to college first and the whole 9 yards. So we were 22, but I swear, looking back at it, I'm like, man, we could have saved so much time. We could have got married earlier. But our families would have thought we were nuts.
Exactly. So in earlier times, it's exactly what Natalie is saying. In earlier times, it was totally normal. And Danielle's saying her mom, who's 60, so we're talking about, 40 some years ago, not ancient history. The world required or assumed there was less norms of, well, you have to do this, and this before you get married. Nowadays, you don't only have to finish college, you also have to pay off your college debts, you have to establish yourself in your business. There's a lot of steps the world might say you need to do before getting married. And as Natalie's saying, well, that's a pity, because it's actually, in many situations, healthier and better if people get married younger. But we're saying go back a few generations, and it wasn't 16, it was 14. I could definitely think of people I know from earlier times that got married when they were 14, got married when they were 15. Think of someone, again, I'm saying quite a while back, got married when he was 13. Definitely discussed in the Talmudic literature, girls being married before they're 12. These all happen because, again, if you don't need to go through that whole process of elementary school and then high school and then college and then pay off your college debts, what's stopping someone from getting married earlier? But we're saying here for the Noahide, nowadays, we don't assume they're really ready until they're about 17. What does ready mean? Ready does not mean she knows how to cook. Ready does not mean he can hold a job. Ready means they have the intellectual maturity for the bond of marriage. And until a person has that intellectual maturity, we don't want them to get married because we're concerned that they might not stay loyal to the marriage. Now, something else, I'm of course not doing all these laws because there's many laws here, but something that I thought was relevant and people might not realize when we're talking. So Netanya, I'm up to page 412 now. I'm up to the last item in this chapter. Of course, nowadays is a very more common than used to be procedure of artificial insemination for a couple that's having fertility issues. Question is permissible under the prohibition of a married woman having relationships with another man? Sometimes in what we generally call IVF, in that procedure, your own husband's seed is what's inseminated, but sometimes it's another man's. Very often it's another man. And the question is that allowed? Definitely, if it happens, it's not a capital offense. But at the same time, definitely it's not a simple thing to do. It's not, well, like, why not? I mean, she's not in a relationship with another man. She's trying to get pregnant, and her husband, he can't do it with his, and it doesn't work, and they want a child, and they're both agreeing to this. Not so. It's really a very not so simple situation, and definitely needs consultation with a rabbi if the situation occurred, if someone needed that procedure, and she was talking about not using from her husband, but using, like, store-bought variety from another man. And that same concept is actually even the question, can a man produce this seed even for this purpose? Because the law is that a man can't waste his seed. And well, it's not wasting, it's going to ultimately produce a child. Not so simple. It's really not so simple. It's really a very difficult question. The best option in that situation, again, we're talking here of a husband and a wife, and they want to have a child, and they're not able to do it naturally. Even to produce that seed, we're told the best thing is to have intercourse with a condom, which will be allowed, and then the seed gets collected there, and it can then be used. So it's your husband's, and it was not done wastefully. But if it can't be your husband's, or it can't be done in that fashion, one really needs rabbinic advice how to do it in a way that is not violating. If it's another man's, and you mixing the seed into your body, is that allowed? How can we do that? And if it's your husband and can't be done in the fashion I described, how can it be done so he's not considered transgressing this idea of wasting seed? Both of which are, of course, very, very big issues in life and in these relationships. So it's just interesting, I thought, because many people might not even connect the dots and think, well, this isn't adultery, we're trying to have a child. Again, we have to look at it, and we have to look at it with rabbinic advice to understand how to do it in a way that's completely permissible according to law. We're going to start next chapter, which is a prohibition of two types of forbidden relationships that I mentioned before, but there's a lot more details, which are homosexual and bestial relationships. Now, again, both of them are biblically prohibited. Both of them would be considered capital offenses. In our world today, of course, there's a lot of crazy messages being given about what's good and what's bad, what's black and what's right and wrong. And it's always good to just know the laws. Again, I'm not going to go through all these laws. I'm just picking out a few that I thought might be relevant. So one that I thought was very relevant, interesting as a law, is that a man cannot be alone with another man who is suspected of homosexuality. We're not here talking about a child. We're saying an adult. Adult man cannot put himself in a situation where he's with another man who is suspected or known of these issues, unless he's in a place that's very open to public access, to public view. You can't go hunting together. You can't go into a field together. You can't go into a private place which is locked together. Even if you have 100% no interest, 100% no desire, 100% no thought, you cannot do this. And obviously, you should never have a male child or a male adolescent in such a situation with a man if there is some suspicion along these lines, which means you would never have your child or your teenager be a private student, take music lessons, be an apprentice, learn how to do wood carvings, be a worker, help clean out his garage, send a mail to a certain destination with him as the escort. I mean, of course, we would say, well, that's crazy. I would never do that with any of my children. Obviously, people sometimes do. And people sometimes don't realize. Nowadays, we probably extend this to all adults with any children in any situation. Enough horror stories have surfaced that we probably all have this awareness, but then you can also forget. Because this is such a nice person. This is such a good person. I'm sure they're safe. Why shouldn't they be safe? They look safe. Therefore, we're told that is actually forbidden because this is not safe. And maybe this person is safe, but there are enough people out there in the world that are not safe. And therefore, you're not going to start discriminating and judging who is safe and who isn't safe, and be very, very, very careful with your children, as I'm sure we all understand. All right. Any questions on any of this? Any thoughts on any of this?
Question is, like, my husband, being a paramedic, we dealt with this for years and years and years. My discomfort with occasionally basically him being like one-on-one partner for the day. It usually wasn't always the same partner, just the schedules, the way they rotate. But they're at a station, which is like, it has places to sleep because they're supposed to sleep when they're not working. And sometimes it was a woman, sometimes it was a man, sometimes it was a gay man, and all this sort of stuff. And when we were first married, that bothered me a lot. Not particularly because I didn't trust him, but because I was like, listen, I would rather spend 10, 12 hours stuck in an ambulance with you every day. I'm your wife, and I don't even get this kind of one-on-one time with you. And yet, you're in this kind of environment with people sometimes you don't even like. This isn't fair. And for the most part, our solution to that is I make friends with all of his coworkers. They all know me really well because in his line of work, unfortunately, I think because of the stress and just all of the different factors together, it's tragically a very high rate of infidelity and divorce and all the rest. So I'm kind of thinking of this like prohibition against like being alone with a gay man. It's like, or even with another woman, it's like, it's kind of part of his job.
I would really, that is a very, 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 and what you're saying is there is a high rate of infidelity. There you have two people, two men or two women or a man and a woman. It could be any combination. So any combination could be a problem. There's no combination that's not going to be a problem, perhaps. And together for 12 hours. That is a very big
24 hours, 48 hours. Yeah.
That is and especially as you're saying, because there's a very high stress in that work. And when there's high stress, as I'm sure we all know,
they bond.
Yeah. Will become much more animalistic. It's just a product of high stress. That's why, as I think we were mentioning last week, or we mentioned when we discussed the laws of modesty. If you remember, we discussed the laws of modesty, and we said it was very interesting that God's laws of modesty actually have to do with soldiers out in war. And I thought that was very interesting because, of course, soldiers are very immodest because of the enormous stresses of warfare. Their most animal nature comes out. That's part of the life of a soldier, and that's obviously all known about soldiers. So definitely in a very high stress environment, there's the bonding and there's the stress that makes them lose some of their guards that they normally have. I don't know. I don't think there's a simple answer. And I would really wonder what a rabbi would tell you. I would really wonder what a rabbi would tell your husband, how to be there and it be appropriate. What guards could he put in place that would create more of a sense of we're not alone, of public. I don't know. I'm not a rabbi, but I would definitely advise that you and your husband speak to a rabbi about it because there's a reason for the laws. All of the laws of the sages. I remember Danielle speaking to me about this many years ago. I know, Danielle, if you remember when your son first started school and asking about him and a teacher, a female teacher, a male teacher, and what were the laws?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because you had a real fear.
Yeah.
And you understand that the laws are there for a reason, that all of these laws are very, very rational. We don't have to be, obviously some laws you have to have a lot of belief and nullification to God's authority. But the Noahide laws are generally very rational. So if it's forbidden and to be alone with a person who is known to be homosexual, and I would definitely extend it in all the ways you're saying here, there's a reason. I definitely think that you and your husband, you can speak to your husband about the topic and speak to an understanding rabbi and say, this is his work. What can we do to make sure that no transgression happens, that nothing ever would happen?
It's been an adventure because we've had friends where things went wrong, not even necessarily on the job per se, but like just the way the conversation from the job translates to outside the job. But the one thing he's had, like I said, one, I make friends with all of his coworkers, so they know me, we're friends, we're good. But at the same time, he has a second rule, which is he never complains about me or our kids, family at all at work. Period. Don't even open that door.
That's a very, very, very smart rule. They're both smart rules, and I would be very, what a rabbi would tell you would be the best way to do it kosher, to safeguard the situation. What will be the best option for him? Does he have choice in who his partners are? And if so, could he specifically say he doesn't want this type of partner and doesn't want this type of partner? And what the rabbi would say is permitted, because it definitely is something that there's a reason for the laws, and none of us should think, oh, well, I trust him, obviously, so obviously we're higher than the laws. Nobody's ever higher than the law. There's a reason for the law, and no one's ever higher than the laws. And even the idea of trust, it's like you could say, like, I mean, again, this is a totally different area, but in terms of trust, like if a person would say to their child, they're putting a filter on their phone, and the child would say, what, you don't trust me? I don't trust the phone. I don't trust that phone. That phone has way too much money invested in it to make it very untrustworthy. So similarly, it's not a question of not trusting him. I don't trust that situation. That situation is way too liable to harm a marriage. We don't trust that situation. Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka's energy is shining tonight, and hopefully the class helped people. And definitely the vignettes in the beginning, and definitely our discussion on it, and our application on it, and understanding some of the questions that we answered, and these laws specifically, hopefully all of them will really be very relevant. And again, remember, tonight and tomorrow, her energy is shining. It's a special time to connect, a special time to receive the blessings from her energy, from that relationship.